Hi folks, I just want to thank you for joining me again in this little series of videos I'm doing, reviewing, giving a personal recollection of the career of the famous five, the stars of 55 who left the club at the end of last season, the five guys who said goodbye to the Ibrox crowd after that last home game of the season, the 2-each draw with Hearts. I did a little video about Philip Hollander on Sunday there, a slightly longer one last night about Alfredo Morelos. I'll be doing two more later in the week, one for Ryan Kent, one for Scotty Arfield, but just now I want to talk to you about the guy who will be coming back to Ibrox, who will be pulling on the Rangers jersey again, as well as the gloves in his testimonial against Newcastle United on the 18th of July, Mr. Allan Greegs McGregor. He does have other nicknames, but this is a family show. And of all the questions people want to ask when they hear the name Allan McGregor, the two of all the family-oriented questions that want to ask about him, is he the greatest Rangers goalkeeper of all time? And what was the best save of all the many world-class saves that he made for Rangers? Well, for the first one, I've been following Rangers for since 1977, about 46 years or something like that. So I'm pretty ancient. I've been watching the club for nearly a third of its existence, but I never saw the likes of Billy Ritchie or Jerry Dawson, Bobby Brown. The goalies that I grew up with were Peter McCloy and Stuart Kennedy. They were fighting out for the number one jersey in the kind of mid to late 70s. Legends, won trebles, won league titles, and Peter McCloy, the only Rangers goalkeeper to win a European trophy. But it wasn't until I saw Chris Woods wearing the famous yellow Rangers goalie jersey that I saw a world-class goalkeeper. I'd heard that Bobby Brown and Jerry Dawson that were certainly of that ilk, and everything I've read and seen about them would certainly indicate that was the case. But Woods was the first world-class Rangers goalie I saw. I didn't think I'd see his like again until the next one, which was Andy Gorham, who wasn't just my favourite Rangers goalie of all time, so-called by myself back then, but was my favourite Rangers player and probably my favourite thing on planet Earth. My favourite thing about existence at that time was Andy Gorham, who would pull off saves that would have you cheering in a way that you wouldn't even cheer for a goal being scored by Allan McGregor or whoever. It would pull off saves, it would have your jaw on the deck, it would have you slightly faint, because just absolutely astounding. I didn't think I would see that again until eventually Allan McGregor was pulling off the same kind of saves. And I think when we combine that with length of service, Allan McGregor had his best part of 20 years at the club over two different spells, then I think, yeah, McGregor really is the best I've ever seen, and you can take that and put it into the argument of the best ever Rangers goalkeeper, however you want to. It also tells you, don't wish anybody has been the greatest of all time when you could have somebody even better coming along shortly afterwards. I'm not going to live much longer, but if I get to see a goalkeeper who's better than Allan McGregor before I die, it'll be a goalkeeper who probably has to go entire seasons keeping a clean sheet in every game. Such are the standards that Greaves has set. It wasn't always like that when he first arrived at Rangers as a kind of mid-teens almost, practically a kid, a school kid when he came to Rangers at first from Hutchie Vale. I think he broke his wrist or something early doors and couldn't even get into the youth teams or the reserve teams, and then he was fighting against like Stefan Klos, Lino Letizzi, Ronald Vaterus under Alec McLeish and under Paul Le Guen before he could get a run at a first team spot. He was loaned out to St Johnstone, loaned out to Dunfermline, played the League Cup final for Dunfermline against Celtic. But under Alec McLeish in 2002-2003, he was the reserve goalkeeper. He was the first choice backup goalkeeper. So he didn't get a game, but he was on the bench through the entirety of a Rangers treble winning season. He's in the dressing room. He's getting a feel for what's required. He's getting a feel for how good it is for Rangers to prove what Rangers are all about, winning everything in Scotland and, having a real go at it in Europe as well. So I think that gave him a taste for what he was going to become. It was the kind of school that he was brought up in, and I think when you know about that, and then you go to his second spell at Rangers in that day against Hamilton Accies. Remember, 2020-2021 season, we're so far out in front in the league title race that it's almost in the bag. We're unbeaten all season. We're having a bad game against Hamilton Accies, and Greaves has got to make a few good saves, but Hamilton equalise with the last kick of the ball, literally the last kick of the ball. And because it's the COVID season, New Douglas Park has got an end missing anyway. You can usually hear the players shouting, but there's no crowd at this game at all. And you could hear Greaves. I don't know if the commentator actually apologised for the language. It's usually the language of the crowd that they're apologising for. But well played, whoever it was at Sky that decided to get a hold of Greaves for the post-match interview, in which he just laid into this team who clearly thought they were special Rangers, that they were the business. Because Allan McGregor knew different. He played under Walter Smith. He played in teams that won League Cups, Scottish Cups, and league titles. And he just laid it on the line. He said, I don't care. The interviewers tried to say to him that day at New Douglas Park, but you had a great game. He's like, I don't care. I would rather have had a rubbish game, and the team won. We were absolutely minced today. And of course, the league title was tied up in pretty short order after that, because Greaves had the standards and he learned them in these early days. He ends up, by the time Walter Smith comes in, John Walter's second spell as Rangers manager, Greaves is his number one. He's part of the mainstay of the team that wins the league title in 2009, 2010, 2011. Towards the end of the 2010, 2011 season, they're one of those kind of neck and neck things with Celtic that actually became quite boring in the first couple of decades of the 21st century, where you know it's going to get down to the last day of the season, but it wouldn't have in 2010-11 if it hadn't been for last Old Firm game of the season. Celtic get one of those penalties that they never seem to get against Rangers. Celtic end at Ibrox. Georgios Samaras steps up with 8 minutes to go to put Celtic into the driving seat for the league title, or he would have if Allan McGregor had to get down there and save the thing. And a few weeks later, we win the title. That's all down to Greaves. He'd already saved a couple of penalties against Dundee United in a shootout in the League Cup final 2007-2008, a season in which we could have won 4 trophies, including a European trophy. Probably the fact that we ended up coming away with the 2 cups is because Allan McGregor got injured at Parkhead. While he was injured at Parkhead, he saves a penalty against Celtic. At a time we had to play Celtic twice at Parkhead, either side of a European semi-final. Again, the kind of stuff that doesn't get talked about a lot by a certain club in this city. That injury, let Neil Alexander come in, and Neil did a great job in the semi-final against Fiorentina, the UEFA Cup. They run to Manchester, and he plays in the final in Manchester. But you thought it'd be nice if Allan McGregor had got to play in a European final, and it was so good that he did in his second spell at Rangers, and he gets to play in Seville. And to be honest, that night in Seville, when it came to the penalty shootout, a part of me was thinking, this is just set up for Greaves. Wasn't to be, but it was the same for a lot of players that night. But at least he's got that on his CV, and he thoroughly deserved that. When he left Rangers in 2012, we all know what was happening then. I know a lot of fans maybe have a problem with that, but for me, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I think it's more about the club effectively leaving him, in some respects, than the other way around. And me, cards on the table, I didn't renew my season ticket the following season. I didn't miss a home game, and I eventually bought a half season ticket at Christmas in 2012, 2013, but I wasn't giving my money to Charles Green. He seemed like an absolute gangster. So I was buying my match ticket on a game-by-game basis, going to different parts of Ibrox, going to visit old stands that I hadn't been in for a wee while. So I didn't have any problem with players feeling exactly the same way instinctively about who was in charge of the club at that time. And to be quite honest, sorry, Greaves, I would love to have been over in Turkey to see you try to speak Turkish when he was at Besiktas. Did great at Besiktas in his season in Turkey, but it would be absolutely hilarious to see him try to speak Turkish. He goes to Hull City, plays in the FA Cup final, saves a penalty for Frank Lampard at Stamford Bridge, I think, in one of his first games for Hull. Well, I think he gave the penalty away, but that was the kind of thing Greaves would do. It wasn't just about playing for Rangers. He gets his 40-odd caps for Scotland, and I'm so proud of that. Didn't play in a major finals for Scotland. Had the old Boozegate thing when he was still a young guy. His first spell at Rangers, bit of a lad. Him and Barry Ferguson not doing too well in terms of their kind of behaviour after, what was it? We played the Netherlands, and they were all kind of getting drunk late on in the hotel, and just basically telling George Burley that they didn't really care what he thought. And that's probably because we were playing for a guy who was a proper legend at that time, and he'd been a proper Scotland manager, Mr. Walter Smith. But Walter wasn't having it. The SFA more or less sacked the 2 of them, and Walter dropped the 2 of them from Rangers. What must it be like to get gotten out for Walter Smith? He thought they'd absolutely shamed the club, but that was it for Barry. But for Greaves, Craig Levein comes in as Scotland manager and wants Greaves back because he just knows he's the best. And I saw him saving a penalty against Northern Ireland, saving a penalty from David Healy, Northern Ireland's all-time top scorer, and a one-time clubmate of Allan McGregor's. I think he gave that one away as well, Greaves, but he just didn't care because he knew he was going to save the thing. And he didn't play in a major finals for Scotland, but the last game he played, I was also there. We beat Israel 3-2 in the Nations League, the Europa Nations League, the UEFA Nations League. The finals are on just now, but this was the first edition, and Scotland had to beat Israel to finish top of the group. James Forrest got a hat-trick that night, and right at the end of the game, Israel, who had been going for it hard, I think a draw would have put them top of the group. Allan McGregor pulls off a brilliant save right at the end to end his Scotland career, but also to put Scotland into the playoffs, from which they would then qualify for Euro 2020, our first major finals for over 2 decades. So that was all down to Greegs as well, getting us to that stage. Another thing that he really deserved to have on his CV. When he came back to Rangers, I think it was a masterstroke by Steven Gerrard to get both him and Stephen Davis in. Again, we're talking about how he left Rangers back in 2012. This was a kind of toupee of the glory years of Walter Smith, the kind of know-how, the nous, the knowledge of the landscape of Scottish football over the 2012 barrier and back into the Gerrard reign. It was all about beating Celtic when Steven Gerrard first arrived. We hadn't done that for the previous 2 seasons. We hadn't done it for years in the league. And Allan McGregor was at the heart of us getting our confidence back in terms of being able to beat everybody in Scotland. We beat Celtic twice at Ibrox in Gerrard's first season. The following season, we had to learn how to beat them at Parkhead. And again, Celtic get one of those penalties they never get against us at Parkhead in the New Year derby. Ryan Christie takes it, Allan McGregor saves it at a packed Parkhead. We win 2-1, and that's it. We've set ourselves up psychologically for the following season, where we didn't lose a single Old Firm game. And we won the league in grand style. And it was lovely, I think, the season after that, when John McLaughlin's playing the Scottish Cup final, he's playing the Cup games, and we're 2-0 up in the Scottish Cup final in extra time against Hearts. And I actually thought to myself, I was in the stand that day, thinking it'd be nice if McLaughlin was to give Greaves a run, because we all thought Allan McGregor was going to be leaving. And he did. He gave him the last 5 minutes, and that was nice to see Greaves get to play a direct part in a Scottish Cup he'd won before, but it probably meant even more when he was back for the second time. And it certainly meant a lot more to us to have won it again after 2012. And it was also a great way to, as I say, we thought it was going to be the last that Allan McGregor would play for us, but he'd been absolutely immense in getting us to Seville. The final we just played a few days earlier. The European stuff, we'd already seen that season. I think the signs that Allan was getting a bit old. There was particularly after the 2-each draw with Borussia Dortmund at Ibrox that put Dortmund out, and we started that epic, the real business end of the run to Seville. We had Motherwell at Ibrox the following Sunday. Celtic had drawn earlier at Easter Road. It was a chance for us to go top of the league. We're 2-0 up at half time. End up drawing the game 2-each. We're just putting it down to the fatigue of the European tie. And then it was when I got home and I was watching the game in telly, I thought, Allan's a bit at fault here for these goals we're conceding. He'd already been seriously at fault, I think, for the goals we lost against Ross County, that 3-each draw at Dingwall slightly earlier. Another kind of main point, another main contributing factor and us failing to defend 55. And it was becoming obvious that I think when you got to the tail end of this season just past, albeit that the post-split games are relatively meaningless, Robbie McCrory, a younger goalkeeper, able to come off his line, almost get out his box. At times, the defence looked a lot more confident, but it wasn't Allan McGregor's fault. The club should have replaced him properly. They should have had backup. When they promoted John McLaughlin to the number 1 spot, it was actually fair enough to have Allan McGregor hang on for another season, sign another contract, extend his contract by another year to be a kind of emergency backup. The fact that he then had to become the number 1 again because McLaughlin wasn't up to it and young Robbie McCrory was either injured or considered too inexperienced, it kind of hung Allan out to dry. But even then, we had the previous season, the saves against Sparta Prague. I say saves, it's 2 saves within the space of 2 seconds. When we had to win the game 2-0, I had to win it by 2 clear goals to get into the knockout stages that eventually took us to Seville. We're 2-0 up because of Alfredo Morelos scoring the goals, but Allan McGregor has this save from point blank range, which is brilliant, and then the ball goes back to another Sparta Prague player who's hitting the thing from even closer, and Allan's saving it with his legs. It was absolutely breathtaking. Even the season just past, the absolute nightmare of a Champions League campaign. Within that, we lose 3-0 to Napoli, and Napoli just won Serie A again for the first time in decades. They were one of the star teams in Europe this season, and they win a penalty, which leads to us going down to 10 men. James Sands fouling the guy, he's the last man. Down to 10 men, but it's still 0-0, and up comes the Polish international Piotr Zielinski. Yeah, can't remember the fella's name, but he takes it, a cracking player. He takes a penalty, Greek saves it, place goes crazy. Referee, that's a retake, infringement, players inside the box. Greek saves it again for the same player. Now, Napoli eventually win the game 3-0, and they score through a penalty, but they had to change the penalty taker for the third penalty. It took them 3 penalties to get one past Greek. So that was nice to see him getting that kind of a last hurrah and sending the joint wild like he always could. And yeah, eventually all good things must come to an end, and Allan is away. I don't know if he's retired, is maybe going to try his luck somewhere else, because although he was a bit of a boy back in the day, I think it was that has been taken into consideration by everybody from within Rangers, who, as it became clear that Allan was leaving the club this season, were saying he's the first guy into training, he's the last guy to leave. He's a consummate professional. And what is the greatest save this consummate professional has ever made? I think we've all got it down to two. I've certainly got it down to two anyway. And into second place for me is the save against Slavia Prague in the first leg of that last 16 tie in the 2020-2021 Europa League. It's one each in the first leg over in the Czech capital, and as a set piece, I can't remember if it's a corner, a free kick, or whatever, but there's a header from kind of the back of the box, and it's just heading towards the bottom corner of the net. It seems impossible to keep out, and then down goes Greaves, and I think he kind of holds it in the end. He holds it in the end. I think that's what it is for me. That's the deciding factor, pushing it into second place, because the best save I've ever seen was against Werder Bremen in the Weserstadion in the last 16 of the 2007-2008 UEFA Cup. Again, a major part in getting us to that final. The Germans, when they are 2 goals down for any kind of first leg deficit they're chasing, will pummel you at their home stadiums, and that's exactly what was happening to us. We were being absolutely overwhelmed by Werder Bremen in this game. We'd beaten them 2-0 in the first leg, and here they were 1-0 up. And I think if we'd gone to extra time, we were goners. The big Brazilian centre half, Naldo, Greaves is kind of on the deck looking stranded because he's doing all he can to keep them at bay, and it seemed like an open goal really. And at first I thought Naldo had just missed an absolute sitter. He had put it straight over the bar. It's only when you see the action replay that you realise, no, Allan McGregor saved that, and it's the greatest save I've ever seen, not just from a Rangers goalkeeper, but just full stop. And that's the one thing I'll always remember when people mention Allan McGregor. All the best to you, Greaves. Thanks for everything.